The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Rideau Hall as Colonel James McPherson adjusted his dress uniform one final time. His chest bore the weight of 15 military decorations, each one telling a story of service, sacrifice, and dedication to Queen and country. The polished brass buttons caught the early Ottawa light, and his ceremonial sword hung precisely at his side. Today was no ordinary day. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was making her first official visit to Canada as the newly crowned sovereign, and McPherson had been selected as the senior Canadian officer to escort her during the ceremonial inspection. McPherson's hands trembled slightly as he straightened his final medal, the Distinguished Service Order he had earned during the Korean conflict. At 42 years old, he had served his country for over 2 decades, rising through the ranks from a young lieutenant fresh out of Royal Military College to his current position as Colonel of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. His military record was impeccable, but nothing had prepared him for this moment, meeting the young queen who had captured the hearts of the Commonwealth. The previous evening, McPherson had received detailed instructions from the Governor-General's Protocol Office. He was to maintain proper military bearing at all times, speak only when spoken to, and under no circumstances was he to initiate conversation with Her Majesty unless specifically required for ceremonial duties. The weight of representing not just his regiment, but all of Canada's military forces pressed heavily on his shoulders as he made his way through the ornate halls of the Governor-General's residence. Outside, the sounds of preparation echoed across the grounds. Military bands were conducting final rehearsals, their brass instruments gleaming in the morning light. The Governor-General's foot guards stood at attention, their bearskin caps perfectly aligned, creating an impressive honor guard for the royal arrival. Protocol officers scurried about with clipboards, ensuring every detail of the ceremony would proceed flawlessly. The stakes were enormous. This visit would set the tone for the new Queen's relationship with Canada, her largest dominion. McPherson's wife, Margaret, had spent hours the night before polishing each of his medals to a mirror shine. She understood the significance of this day perhaps better than anyone. As the daughter of a military family herself, she knew that moments like these defined careers and created lasting impressions that could influence a soldier's future for decades to come. Her husband's decorations represented not just his individual achievements, but the valor and dedication of countless Canadian servicemen who had fought alongside Britain in 2 world wars and Korea. The collection of medals adorning McPherson's chest told the complete story of Canada's military involvement in the modern era. His grandfather's Victory Medal from the Great War had been passed down to him, a tangible link to the trenches of Vimy Ridge where Canadian forces had first truly distinguished themselves as an independent fighting force. His own service medals from World War II, including the France and Germany Star, marked his participation in the liberation of Europe alongside British and American forces. More recent additions included his Korean War Service Medal, earned during the brutal fighting at Kapyong, where Canadian forces had held their ground against overwhelming Chinese attacks. Each decoration had been earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and McPherson wore them with a mixture of pride and solemnity, knowing that many of his comrades had not returned home to receive their own recognition. As he walked through the marble corridors of Rideau Hall, McPherson reflected on the remarkable young woman he was about to meet. Queen Elizabeth II had ascended to the throne at just 25 years old following her father's unexpected death, and she had already begun to demonstrate the poise and dedication that would define her reign. Her commitment to the Commonwealth and her understanding of military service had been evident from her own wartime service in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, where she had trained as a driver and mechanic. The protocol officer appeared at McPherson's elbow, checking his watch with obvious nervousness. The royal motorcade was approaching the gates of Rideau Hall, and within minutes, the Queen would arrive for the ceremonial inspection that would mark the beginning of her Canadian tour. McPherson took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to represent his country with the dignity and professionalism that had been instilled in him throughout his military career. Through the tall windows of the residence, he could see crowds gathering along the street, Canadian flags waving enthusiastically as citizens hoped to catch a glimpse of their new sovereign. The excitement was palpable, and McPherson felt a surge of pride in his country and his role in this historic moment. Little did he know that within the hour, an unexpected moment of royal humor would create a memory that would last a lifetime and provide a charming anecdote that would be retold in military circles for generations to come. The distant sound of motorcycle escorts grew louder, and McPherson knew that history was about to unfold. He had served his country faithfully for over 20 years, but this single morning would prove to be unlike any other in his distinguished career. The stage was set for an encounter that would reveal the human side of monarchy and demonstrate that even the most formal occasions could be touched by moments of genuine warmth and humor. The royal Rolls-Royce glided through the gates of Rideau Hall with a quiet dignity befitting a sovereign's arrival. Queen Elizabeth II sat composed in the back seat, her pale blue coat and matching hat perfectly coordinated for the Canadian autumn morning. Despite her youth, she carried herself with a regal bearing that had been carefully cultivated through years of training and preparation for this role she had never expected to inherit so young. Prince Philip sat beside her, occasionally pointing out details of the Canadian landscape and architecture as they approached the Governor-General's residence. Inside the residence, McPherson felt his pulse quicken as the sounds of the royal arrival reached his ears. The carefully orchestrated ceremony was about to begin, and he reviewed the protocol one final time in his mind. He would escort Her Majesty along the line of Canadian military representatives, providing brief introductions and ensuring that each service branch was properly recognized. The weight of his medals seemed heavier than usual as he contemplated the historic significance of this moment. Governor-General Vincent Massey, himself a distinguished diplomat and the first Canadian-born Governor-General, greeted the royal couple at the entrance to Rideau Hall. The formal pleasantries were exchanged with the practiced ease of experienced diplomats, but there was genuine warmth in the interaction. The Queen's genuine interest in Canada and its people was already becoming apparent, even in these early moments of her visit. As the royal party moved into the residence, McPherson took his position at attention, flanked by representatives from the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and his own Army regiment. Each officer had been selected not just for their military bearing, but for their distinguished service records and their ability to represent the finest traditions of Canadian military service. The pressure was immense, but each man stood ready to honor his country and his sovereign. The Queen entered the reception hall with a graceful stride that commanded immediate attention. Despite her petite stature, her presence filled the room, and every person present felt the weight of the moment. Her blue eyes were alert and interested as she surveyed the assembled military representatives, and McPherson could see that she was genuinely engaged with the proceedings rather than merely performing a duty. Governor-General Massey began the formal introductions, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of diplomatic protocol. Your Majesty, I have the honor to present the senior military representatives of your Canadian forces. The Queen nodded graciously, her white-gloved hands clasped neatly in front of her as she prepared to meet each officer in turn. The first introduction was to Admiral Robert Mangay of the Royal Canadian Navy, whose chest displayed the impressive array of decorations earned during his distinguished naval career, including service in both World Wars. The Queen spoke briefly with him about Canada's naval traditions and the important role of the fleet in protecting the nation's extensive coastlines. Her questions demonstrated a genuine understanding of military affairs that impressed all present. Next came Air Marshal Royce Lemon of the Royal Canadian Air Force, whose medals included recognition for his service as a bomber pilot during World War II. The Queen's conversation with him revealed her appreciation for the courage required of aircrew during wartime, and her comments about the growing importance of air power in modern defense showed her grasp of contemporary military strategy. Finally, Governor-General Massey turned to McPherson, and the moment he had been preparing for arrived. Your Majesty, I present Colonel James McPherson of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, who will serve as your escort during today's ceremonial inspection. McPherson executed a perfect military bow, his heels clicking together with practiced precision as he acknowledged his sovereign. The Queen stepped forward to greet him, her eyes immediately drawn to the impressive display of medals adorning his chest. McPherson stood at rigid attention as she approached, every muscle in his body disciplined by years of military training. The late morning light streaming through the tall windows of Rideau Hall caught the polished surface of his decorations, creating small rainbows that danced across the brass and silver. Her Majesty paused in front of him, her gaze moving systematically across the ribbons and medals that chronicled his military service. McPherson could feel his heart pounding beneath the weight of his decorations as the Queen studied each one with obvious interest. The silence stretched for what seemed like an eternity, though in reality it was only a few seconds. The Queen's expression remained professionally pleasant as she continued her examination of his medals. McPherson had worn these same decorations at countless formal occasions, but never had they received such scrutiny from such an important observer. Each ribbon represented months or years of service, dangerous missions completed, and comrades lost along the way. Behind the Queen, Prince Philip observed the interaction with interest, his own military background giving him appreciation for the significance of the decorations being displayed. The other officers present watched respectfully as their sovereign conducted her inspection, each man proud to witness this recognition of Canadian military service. The formal atmosphere of the moment was palpable as protocol officers positioned themselves discreetly around the room, ready to guide the proceedings to their next stage. Outside, the sounds of the military band could be heard as they prepared for the outdoor ceremony that would follow this indoor reception. The carefully planned schedule allowed for only brief interactions, but the Queen was clearly taking her time to show proper respect for the military service being honored. McPherson remained motionless as the inspection continued, his years of military discipline serving him well in this moment of intense scrutiny. He could smell the Queen's subtle perfume and noticed the careful attention she paid to each detail of his uniform and decorations. This was clearly more than a perfunctory acknowledgement. Her Majesty was genuinely interested in understanding and honoring the service represented by these medals. The Queen's examination of McPherson's medals continued with the methodical attention of someone who genuinely understood their significance. Her finger traced the air just above the ribbons, careful not to actually touch the decorations, but clearly studying each one with interest. McPherson could see her lips moving slightly as she silently read the abbreviated names printed on the ribbon bars, demonstrating a knowledge of military honors that impressed everyone present. "Colonel McPherson," the Queen said finally, her voice carrying the crisp accent of the British upper class, but warmed with genuine interest, "your decorations tell quite a story of service." McPherson felt a flush of pride at the recognition, maintaining his rigid posture while internally marveling at the Queen's attention to detail. Her knowledge of military matters was clearly far more extensive than many had expected from someone so young. The Queen paused at one particular medal, the Distinguished Service Order that held the place of honor among his decorations. "This DSO," she continued, "was earned in Korea, I believe." McPherson's chest swelled with pride as he confirmed her observation. "Yes, Your Majesty, at the Battle of Kapyong in April 1951. The Queen nodded approvingly, clearly familiar with the engagement where Canadian forces had distinguished themselves against overwhelming odds. As she continued her inspection, the Queen's expression began to change subtly. What had started as professional interest seemed to transform into something approaching amazement. McPherson noticed her eyebrows raise slightly as she took in the full scope of his decorations, which included medals from multiple campaigns and conflicts spanning more than 2 decades of service. The assembled dignitaries watched in fascination as their young sovereign demonstrated her military knowledge. Governor General Massey observed with obvious satisfaction, knowing that the Queen's genuine engagement with Canada's military representatives would be noted and appreciated by the Canadian people. The other military officers present felt a surge of pride in their colleagues' recognition and in their sovereign's obvious respect for military service. Prince Philip stepped slightly closer to observe the interaction, his own decorated naval career giving him a keen appreciation for the significance of the moment. He had served with distinction during World War II and understood the weight of the honors being displayed. His presence added gravity to the occasion, while his subtle smile suggested his approval of his wife's thorough approach to acknowledging military service. The Queen took a half step back to take in the full effect of Macpherson's chest full of medals, her head tilting slightly as if she were seeing the display from a new perspective. The morning light continued to play across the polished metal and colorful ribbons, creating an impressive visual display that would have been noteworthy in any military gathering. "My goodness, Colonel," the Queen said, her voice taking on a tone that was both admiring and slightly incredulous. Macpherson felt a moment of uncertainty as he tried to read her expression. Was she impressed by his service record, or was there something else behind her comment? The protocol officers around the room maintained their professional composure, but Macpherson detected a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The Queen's next words would become the stuff of military legend, repeated in officers' messes and regimental gatherings for decades to come. Looking directly at Macpherson with a mischievous sparkle in her young eyes, she delivered her observation with perfect timing and a completely straight face. "Colonel Macpherson," she said, pausing dramatically, "I do hope you don't fall over backwards." The words hung in the air for a moment as everyone present processed what the Queen had just said. Then, as the meaning became clear, a wave of barely suppressed amusement swept through the assembled group. Macpherson's mind reeled as he tried to process the Queen's comment. Had the sovereign of the British Empire and the Commonwealth just made a joke about the weight of his medals? The formality of the occasion seemed to evaporate in an instant as the Queen's unexpected humor broke through the rigid protocol that had governed every moment of the morning. Prince Philip was the first to react, a broad grin spreading across his face as he appreciated his wife's quick wit. Known for his own sense of humor and occasional irreverent comments, he clearly approved of the Queen's ability to inject levity into even the most formal occasions. His barely contained chuckle provided the cue for others to react to the royal jest. Governor General Massey's diplomatic training served him well as he managed to maintain his composure while clearly enjoying the Queen's unexpected humor. The other military officers exchanged quick glances, each wondering how they should respond to their sovereign's joke. The protocol for this situation had definitely not been covered in their briefings. The Queen herself seemed delighted with the effect of her comment, her eyes twinkling with mischief as she watched the reactions around the room. For a brief moment, the weight of crown and ceremony seemed to lift from her shoulders, revealing the intelligent and witty young woman beneath the royal persona. It was a glimpse of the personality that would endear her to millions of subjects over the coming decades. Macpherson found himself in an unprecedented situation. Military training had prepared him for many challenges, but responding to royal humor while maintaining proper protocol was entirely new territory. The absurdity of the situation, standing at attention while his sovereign made jokes about his medals, struck him as wonderfully surreal. The tension that had built up throughout the morning's formal proceedings seemed to dissolve in the wake of the Queen's comment. What had been a rigid ceremonial occasion suddenly felt more human and approachable, thanks to one perfectly timed royal observation about the practical challenges of military decorations. Macpherson's military composure finally cracked as the full impact of the Queen's joke settled in. Despite decades of training to maintain rigid formality in the presence of superior officers, he found himself fighting back a smile that threatened to transform into outright laughter. The absurdity of the situation, being teased by his sovereign about the very decorations meant to honor his service, was too delightful to resist entirely. "Your Majesty," Macpherson managed to say, his voice carefully controlled, but with a hint of warmth that had been absent from the formal proceedings. "I've never considered that particular occupational hazard of military service." His response drew an appreciative smile from the Queen, who seemed genuinely pleased that her humor had been well received rather than causing offense or confusion. The Queen's laughter was musical and genuine, filling the formal reception room with a sound that was rarely heard in such ceremonial settings. Her amusement was infectious, and even the most protocol-conscious officials in the room found themselves relaxing slightly in the face of their sovereign's obvious enjoyment of the moment. It was becoming clear that Queen Elizabeth II possessed not only the dignity expected of a monarch, but also the common touch that would serve her well throughout her reign. Prince Philip stepped forward slightly, clearly enjoying his wife's successful attempt at levity. "Perhaps we should issue standard equipment backpacks to our most decorated officers," he suggested with mock seriousness, "to help distribute the weight more evenly." His comment drew another round of barely suppressed chuckles from the assembled group, and Macpherson found himself genuinely enjoying what had begun as one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of his military career. The other military officers present were witnessing a side of royalty that few people ever saw. The Queen's ability to balance formal dignity with genuine humor was revealing itself as one of her greatest strengths as a leader. Admiral Mangay and Air Marshal Sleman exchanged glances that conveyed both surprise and admiration for their young sovereign's unexpected wit and timing. Governor General Massey, ever the diplomat, seized the moment to further the conversation while maintaining appropriate respect for protocol. "Your Majesty demonstrates a keen understanding of the practical challenges faced by our most distinguished servicemen," he said with a diplomatic smile. Perhaps Colonel Macpherson could share some insights about the weight of military honors, both literally and figuratively. The Queen nodded approvingly at this suggestion, her interest clearly genuine as she waited for Macpherson's response. The Colonel found himself in the unprecedented position of being invited to engage in actual conversation with his sovereign rather than simply responding to formal queries. The weight of his medals suddenly seemed less burdensome than the weight of this unexpected opportunity. "Your Majesty," Macpherson began, finding his confidence growing as the formal atmosphere continued to soften. "I've always considered these decorations to be a privilege to wear rather than a burden to bear. Though I must admit, after 30 years of adding to the collection, my uniforms do require more frequent tailoring adjustments." His honest response drew another warm smile from a Queen and a knowing nod from Prince Philip. The Queen's next comment would further cement this moment in military folklore. "I suppose," she said with perfect timing, "that's why we have military tailors rather than civilian ones. They must understand the structural engineering required to properly support a distinguished military career." The observation was so unexpectedly technical and humorous that even the protocol officers couldn't maintain their entirely serious demeanor. As the laughter subsided, Macpherson realized that he was experiencing something truly remarkable. The formal distance between sovereign and subject had temporarily dissolved, replaced by a moment of genuine human connection. The Queen's ability to use humor to bridge that gap, while never diminishing her dignity or authority, was masterful, and Macpherson understood that he was witnessing qualities that would define her reign. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with the Queen asking detailed questions about various medals and their significance. Her knowledge of military history and current affairs impressed everyone present, but it was her ability to combine this serious engagement with moments of levity that truly stood out. She asked about the Korean War, the challenges of peacekeeping operations, and the evolution of military training, all while maintaining the warm atmosphere her initial joke had created. Prince Philip contributed his own observations about naval traditions and the differences between various Commonwealth military systems. His easy rapport with the Canadian officers and his obvious pride in his wife's performance added another layer of warmth to the proceedings. The royal couple's genuine interest in and respect for military service was becoming increasingly apparent. As the indoor reception began to wind down in preparation for the outdoor ceremonies, the Queen made one final comment that would remain with McPherson for the rest of his life. "Colonel," she said, "I hope our Canadian forces know how proud we are of their service and sacrifice. And I hope your back knows how proud we are as well." The comment combined genuine emotion with a return to the humor that had defined their interaction, creating a perfect ending to an unexpected conversation. The formal protocols reasserted themselves as the royal party prepared to move to the next phase of the visit, but the atmosphere had been permanently changed by those few minutes of royal humor and genuine connection. McPherson straightened his shoulders, carefully, given the Queen's earlier concerns, and prepared to escort Her Majesty to the outdoor ceremony, knowing that he had just experienced something that would be remembered and retold for generations to come. The outdoor ceremony proceeded with magnificent pageantry, but McPherson found that the Queen's earlier humor had fundamentally changed his experience of the entire day. As he escorted Her Majesty along the line of assembled troops, he carried himself with a new confidence born not just from military training, but from the personal connection he had unexpectedly forged with his sovereign. The weight of his medals no longer felt quite so significant, and he caught himself occasionally touching his chest with a smile, remembering the Queen's just about falling over backwards. The Queen's behavior during the outdoor inspection revealed the full scope of her remarkable character. She moved among the assembled Canadian servicemen with genuine warmth and interest, asking detailed questions about their training, their experiences, and their families. Yet periodically, when she passed close to McPherson during the ceremony, he caught a glint of mischief in her eyes that reminded him of their shared moment of humor inside the residence. The military band played stirring renditions of God Save the Queen and "Oh, Canada" as the formal inspection continued, but McPherson noticed that the Queen seemed more relaxed and animated than she had during the early morning proceedings. Her earlier joke appeared to have broken some invisible barrier, allowing her natural personality to shine through the formal requirements of royal protocol. The assembled troops responded to her genuine engagement with obvious enthusiasm and pride. Word of the Queen's joke began to spread quietly through the ranks of assembled military personnel, passed along by the officers who had witnessed the exchange inside Rideau Hall. The story took on a life of its own as it moved through the ceremonial formation, with each retelling adding new details and emphasizing different aspects of the exchange. By the time the outdoor ceremony concluded, hundreds of Canadian servicemen had heard some version of the tale. Prince Philip's own interactions with the troops revealed his appreciation for his wife's successful navigation of the morning's events. His comments to various officers included subtle references to the weight of military service and the importance of proper support systems, delivered with the same dry wit that had characterized the Queen's earlier observation. The royal couple's ability to work together to create moments of connection within formal ceremonies was becoming increasingly apparent. As the official ceremonies drew to a close, McPherson found himself walking alongside the Queen toward the royal motorcade that would take her to the next stop on her Canadian tour. The formal distance between sovereign and subject had been permanently altered by their brief moment of shared humor, and McPherson felt honored to have experienced this glimpse of the woman behind the crown. "Colonel McPherson," the Queen said as they reached the royal car, "I do hope you will convey my appreciation to all the members of your regiment. Their service honors both Canada and the Commonwealth." McPherson assured her that he would relay her message, but the Queen wasn't finished. With that same mischievous sparkle in her eyes, she added, "And do remind them about the importance of proper posture and balance when wearing their decorations." The final joke brought their interaction full circle, and McPherson realized that the Queen had given him not just a memorable personal experience, but a perfect story to share with his fellow officers and the troops under his command. The humanity she had revealed through her humor would make her more relatable and beloved to Canadian servicemen for years to come. As the royal motorcade departed Rideau Hall, McPherson stood at attention with his fellow officers, saluting as the Queen's car disappeared through the gates. The formal protocols had been observed, the ceremonies had proceeded flawlessly, and Canada had successfully welcomed its young sovereign. But for McPherson and those who had witnessed the morning's events, the day would be remembered not just for its pageantry, but for the unexpected moments of royal humor that had transformed a formal occasion into a genuinely human experience. In the weeks and months that followed, McPherson found himself retelling the story of the Queen's joke at regimental dinners, military gatherings, and social occasions throughout Canada. Each telling seemed to enhance the tale's appeal, and it quickly became one of the most beloved anecdotes in Canadian military circles. The story spread beyond military audiences, becoming a popular example of the Queen's wit and her ability to connect with her subjects through humor. The Queen's jest about McPherson's medals became more than just a funny story. It became a symbol of her approach to leadership and her understanding of how to balance dignity with accessibility. Military historians would later point to this early example of her humor as indicative of the qualities that would make her reign so successful and enduring. Years later, as McPherson advanced through the ranks to become a general, he would often reflect on that morning at Rideau Hall as a defining moment in his understanding of leadership. The Queen's ability to maintain her authority while using humor to create genuine human connections had provided him with a masterclass in leadership that no military academy could have taught. The medals that had prompted the Queen's original joke continued to grow in number as McPherson's career progressed, but he never again wore them without remembering that autumn morning when a young queen had joked about their weight. The decorations remained symbols of his military service, but they also became reminders of a moment when royal protocol had given way to human connection, creating a memory that would last a lifetime. When McPherson finally retired from military service decades later, the story of the Queen's joke had become part of Canadian military folklore. New generations of officers heard the tale during their training, and it served as both entertainment and instruction about the importance of maintaining humanity even in the most formal circumstances. The Queen's jest had evolved from a spontaneous moment of humor into a lasting lesson about leadership, dignity, and the power of well-timed levity to create lasting connections between people of all ranks and stations.